My brother stole my business idea while I funded his lifestyle, so I built it bigger alone and watched him lose everything slowly from afar. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and for most of my adult life, I believed being the reliable one was just my role in the family. Not a compliment, more like an assignment I never agreed to. My parents used words like grounded and responsible when they talked about me, the same way you'd describe a piece of furniture you expect to hold weight forever. About my older brother, though, they always smiled. He was creative. He was visionary. He just needed time. My brother had this way of lighting up a room. He talked fast, dreamed big, and burned out even faster. Every few months, there was a new project, a startup idea, a partnership, a plan that was definitely going to change everything. And every time it fizzled, there was an explanation. Wrong timing. Bad partners. People who didn't believe in him enough. Somehow, that explanation always ended with my phone buzzing. "Hey man," he'd say, voice low and embarrassed. "I just need a little help this month." So I helped. Again and again. I covered rent gaps when his checks bounced. Paid off credit cards when the interest started screaming. Fixed his car when it died, paid for flights when he needed a reset, even covered vacations he insisted were for networking. My parents praised me for it. "You're strong enough to handle it," my mom would say. "Your brother just isn't built like you." I told myself that's what family did, one of us steadied the ground while the other chased the sky. Meanwhile, at my own job, I kept running into the same problem over and over. Same inefficiency. Same frustration. Every shift ended with me thinking, why hasn't anyone fixed this yet? I started jotting notes after work, sketching ideas on receipts, thinking through solutions on my commute home. It wasn't flashy. It was practical. Real. One night, over takeout at his place, food I paid for, I mentioned it casually. Just talking. Just thinking out loud. He leaned in, eyes sharp, asking questions I didn't expect. I didn't hesitate. I didn't protect it. I just shared. Because at the time, it never crossed my mind that loyalty and ownership could ever be at odds. I didn't pitch it to him like a startup. That's the part that still messes with me. I wasn't trying to impress him or recruit him or ask for help. I was just talking, venting, really, the way you do with someone you trust. I told him about the bottlenecks at work, how the same issue kept costing time and money, how everyone complained about it but no one actually fixed it. I remember shrugging and saying, "It's probably stupid, but I keep thinking there has to be a cleaner way." He didn't laugh. He didn't brush it off like he usually did with my stuff. He got quiet. Leaned back in his chair. Then he leaned forward again, elbows on his knees, eyes locked on me. "Wait," he said slowly. "Walk me through that again." So I did. I explained how it could work in simple terms. What the process might look like. Who it would help first. I even joked that it wasn't some flashy, Silicon Valley thing, just a boring solution to a boring problem. He nodded the whole time, like he was listening to a language he suddenly understood. "That's actually solid," he said. "Like, really solid." That felt good. I won't lie. Coming from him, Mr. Big Ideas, it felt like validation I didn't know I wanted. He started asking more questions. How much it would cost to build. Whether I'd checked competitors. What kind of people would pay for it. I told him I hadn't gone that far yet, that it was just something rattling around in my head. "You should do something with this," he said. "Don't let it die in your notes app." I remember laughing. "When?" I asked. "Between paying your bills and working full-time?" He smiled, clapped me on the shoulder. "Hey, once I get back on my feet, maybe I can help you push it." That sentence stuck with me. Help you push it. I didn't notice how naturally he said you and not we. I didn't notice how he mentally placed himself just adjacent enough to claim proximity without responsibility. I just felt supported. Like maybe, for once, my role wasn't just to fund someone else's future. Later that night, driving home, my head buzzed with possibilities. I told myself it was harmless to talk. Ideas were cheap, right? I had no idea that conversation was the moment something quietly stopped belonging to me. After that night, something shifted, but not in a way I immediately understood. My brother started checking in more. Not about my life, really, but about the idea. He'd text things like, random thought, what if you tweak this part, or I saw something online that reminded me of what you were saying. It felt like encouragement, like he was finally taking me seriously instead of just seeing me as the guy who Venmo'd him when things fell apart. At the same time, the money never stopped flowing in one direction. Just one more month, he said when his rent was late again. I swear I'm close to something, when his credit card maxed out. I need to look presentable for meetings, when he booked a weekend trip he couldn't afford. And I paid. Every time. I told myself it was temporary. That once he stabilized, things would even out. That this was the cost of being the dependable one in a family that leaned hard on that label. My parents reinforced it without realizing what they were doing. You know how your brother is, my dad said once over the phone. He's a dreamer. He needs support. And you, my mom added gently. You've always had your head on straight. What they didn't see was how tight my own budget had become. How my savings account stopped growing and started hovering. How I worked overtime while he talked about momentum. How I'd sit at my desk late, staring at my notes for the idea, too drained to do anything with them. Meanwhile, he talked like he was part of the process. Like my idea was something we were orbiting together. He'd say things like, when this takes off, or, if you launch, always framed in hypotheticals that kept him safe from commitment. Support without risk. Enthusiasm without skin in the game. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe someone in my family finally saw my potential instead of just my utility. But there were moments, small ones, where something felt off. He started asking less about whether I'd build it and more about how it would work. Technical details. Market angles. Stuff I was still figuring out myself. I brushed the feeling aside. I told myself I was being paranoid. After all, he was my brother. Still, late at night, when my bank app glowed on my phone and his messages popped up asking for one more favor, a quiet thought crept in, one I wasn't ready to face yet. What if I was funding more than just his lifestyle? The first real crack didn't come with a fight or some dramatic reveal. It came casually, almost lazily, which somehow made it worse. We were at our parents' house for dinner, the kind of loud, crowded evening where everyone talks over each other and nothing feels serious. My brother was pacing the living room, phone in hand, mid-story about something he'd been working on. And the solution basically cuts out the middle step entirely, he said, waving his hand. It saves time, saves money, it just makes more sense. I froze. The words weren't similar to mine. They were mine. Same phrasing. Same logic. Even the example he used was one I'd given him weeks earlier while half asleep on his couch. My fork hovered in midair as my parents nodded along, impressed. That sounds really smart, my mom said. See? This is what happens when you focus. I laughed. A short, automatic sound that felt like muscle memory. Yeah, I said lightly. That's basically what I was telling you about before, remember? He didn't miss a beat. Right, he said, smiling. Same space. Just been thinking about it more. The conversation moved on, but my appetite was gone. My chest felt tight in a way I couldn't explain without sounding dramatic. On the drive home later, I replayed it over and over, telling myself I was overreacting. Ideas overlapped. Families shared thoughts. It didn't mean anything. A few days later, I called him. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "When you were talking at dinner, are you actually working on something like that?" There was a pause. Just long enough to register. "Not really," he said. "I mean, I've brainstormed a bit. You know how my brain works. Don't worry about it." I told him I wasn't worried. I told him it was fine. And technically, nothing about his tone was aggressive or defensive. But after that call, things changed. He stopped asking for money as often. Stopped calling just to vent. At first, I felt relieved, like maybe he was finally standing on his own. Then I noticed he also stopped sharing details. Messages became shorter. Updates got vague. And every time I thought about pressing him, I hesitated, afraid of looking jealous or controlling. I didn't know it yet, but that distance wasn't independence. It was separation, strategic, quiet, and already in motion. I didn't find out from him. That's the part that still stings the most. I found out from a guy I barely knew, a friend of a friend, who tagged my brother in a LinkedIn post. I was scrolling mindlessly on my lunch break, thumb moving out of habit more than interest, when his name jumped out at me. Big smile. Professional headshot. A caption full of buzzwords. Proud to announce the launch of, company name, a solution designed to streamline, exact problem I'd been obsessing over for months. My stomach dropped. I clicked the post, heart thudding, and there it was. The product description. The pitch. The problem statement. Even the "Why It Matters" section read like my late-night notes, cleaned up, polished, but unmistakably familiar. This wasn't inspired by my idea. This was my idea, dressed better and standing on a stage I didn't know existed. I scrolled through the comments. Investors congratulating him. Former co-workers praising his vision. My parents had liked the post. I called him immediately. Straight to voicemail. When he finally picked up an hour later, his tone was upbeat. Too upbeat. "Oh, hey. I was meaning to tell you," he said, like he'd forgotten to mention a movie he'd seen. "Tell me what?" My voice sounded distant, even to me. That things moved faster than I expected. I asked him how long this had been happening. He dodged. I asked him why he never told me. He sighed, like I was being difficult. "You're overthinking this," he said. "Ideas don't belong to anyone. Execution does." I reminded him, quietly, of the money. The months. The conversations. The words he'd repeated at dinner. He laughed. A soft, disarming laugh. "Man, I never asked you to pay for anything. You helped because you wanted to." By the time I hung up, my hands were shaking. I felt stupid. Used. Stripped of something I hadn't even realized I was protecting. That night, my mom texted me, "You should be proud of your brother. This is a big moment for him." I stared at the message for a long time, realizing I wasn't just cut out of a business. I was erased from the story entirely. After the launch, it was like reality itself got rewritten, and I was the only one who noticed. Every conversation, every explanation, every reaction from my family made me feel like I was slowly losing my grip on what had actually happened. When I tried to talk about it, even carefully, I was met with the same response: "Why are you making this such a big deal?" I asked my brother to meet in person. Just us. No parents. No group chat. We sat across from each other at a coffee shop, the kind with exposed brick and soft music, like it was designed to keep things calm. He scrolled on his phone while I talked, nodding occasionally, already bored. "I just don't understand how you can say this wasn't mine too," I said. "You wouldn't even be in this space if I hadn't." He cut me off. "You're acting like I stole something," he said flatly. "That's a really unfair accusation." Unfair. The word hit harder than I expected. He explained, patiently, almost kindly, that ideas were common, that I'd never actually built anything, that he'd taken the risk. He reminded me that I was busy, tired, distracted. He framed the whole thing like he'd done me a favor by not dragging me into something I clearly didn't have time for. When I brought up the money, his expression changed. "I never asked you for that," he said. "You offered. That was your choice." That line became the family's favorite. My parents repeated it like a mantra. "You can't hold generosity over someone's head," my dad said. "Don't ruin your relationship with your brother over bitterness," my mom warned. Bitterness. Jealousy. Insecurity. Those were the words attached to me now. The reliable one, suddenly painted as unstable because I dared to feel wronged. Family dinners turned tense. Conversations stopped when I walked in. My brother spoke about his company like I wasn't there, or worse, like I was an audience member. I smiled when expected. I stayed quiet when it hurt. At night, alone, I replayed everything. Wondered if I really had imagined it. If maybe I was overreacting. The worst part wasn't losing the idea. It was losing the certainty that my place in the family had ever been about love, and not just usefulness. Rock bottom didn't arrive all at once. It crept in quietly, disguised as normal days that felt heavier than they should have. I'd wake up, go to work, do everything I was supposed to do, and still feel like I was walking around with something missing from my chest. One night, sitting alone in my apartment, I opened my banking app out of habit and just stared at the numbers. They were bad. Not catastrophic. Not overdraft level dramatic. Just low enough to hurt. Low enough to make every past transfer replay in my head like a receipt I couldn't return. Rent. Cards. Trips. Just one more month. I added it up for the first time and felt sick. I had funded his runway. I had paid for his patience, his freedom, his chance to look confident in rooms I'd never been invited into. And now he was winning. Everywhere I looked, his name popped up. Articles. Podcasts. Posts about grit and vision. Friends texted me screenshots with messages like, "Dude, isn't this your brother? That's insane." I typed congratulations I didn't mean. I liked posts with my jaw clenched. I watched my parents beam with pride, bragging about him to relatives while I sat there, invisible again. At night, the doubts got louder. If the idea was really mine, why didn't I protect it? If I was so smart, why was I broke and exhausted? Maybe this is just what happens to people like me. I stopped opening my notes. Stopped sketching ideas. Every thought felt contaminated, like it didn't belong to me anymore. I started telling myself that entrepreneurship wasn't for me, that I was better off staying in my lane. Reliable. Quiet. Useful in ways no one applauded. One evening, after another family dinner where his success dominated the table, I sat in my car and just didn't start it. I stared through the windshield, hands on the steering wheel, feeling small in a way I hadn't since I was a kid. That was the moment it hit me. I hadn't just lost an idea or money. I had lost belief in myself, and I didn't know how to get it back. The thing about hitting rock bottom is that eventually, the noise gets so loud it goes quiet. After weeks of spiraling, something in me just stopped begging for validation. I didn't wake up empowered or inspired. I woke up tired of feeling humiliated. Tired of replaying conversations in my head, hoping for a different ending. Tired of letting his success define my failure. So I went quiet. I stopped bringing it up with my family. Stopped doom-scrolling his updates. Stopped waiting for an apology that was never coming. Instead, I reopened my notes one night, not to reclaim the old idea, but to understand it. I read through everything with a colder, clearer lens. And for the first time, I saw the flaws. The shortcuts. The things I would have done differently if I'd been forced to actually build it. That realization hurt, but it also cracked something open. I started again from scratch. No announcements. No group chats. No supportive conversations. I worked early mornings before my job and late nights after, sitting at my kitchen table with cheap coffee and a borrowed laptop. I rebuilt the concept quietly, improving the parts he'd rushed and discarding the ones he'd oversold. I didn't tell my brother. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell anyone. Failure stopped feeling scary once I accepted that I was already invisible. There was nothing left to lose socially. No reputation to protect. Just the work. Some nights, exhaustion hit hard. My apartment felt too small. The silence felt heavy. But it was honest. No one was watching. No one was judging. Every decision was mine. Then, one night, something small happened. I tested a version of the product with a single user, someone who didn't know my last name or my family story. They messaged me back the next day. "This actually fixes the problem," they wrote. "Way better than what's out there." I stared at the screen longer than I want to admit. It wasn't success. It wasn't revenge. But for the first time in months, it felt like proof that I still existed outside my brother's shadow. And I wasn't done yet. Once I saw that first response, something inside me settled. Not excitement, focus. The kind that doesn't need to be shared. I kept working in silence, stacking small improvements on top of each other, resisting the urge to rush or announce anything. Every feature I built was a reaction to something I knew he'd ignored. Every decision was shaped by mistakes I'd watched him make from the outside. I paid attention to users instead of hype. When someone said, "This part is confusing," I rewrote it. When they said, "I wish it did this," I listened. No ego. No press releases. Just iteration. Slow, boring, effective. Money was still tight, but now it felt intentional. Every dollar went towards something concrete instead of disappearing into someone else's lifestyle. I stopped thinking in terms of winning and started thinking in terms of lasting. Control mattered more than speed. Sustainability mattered more than applause. Occasionally, I'd hear updates about my brother's company through the family grapevine. Big meetings. Big promises. Big growth numbers that always sounded slightly inflated. My parents mentioned him less directly now, like they were careful not to poke something sensitive. I nodded, kept my responses neutral, and went back to work. The strangest part was how calm I felt. No need to prove anything. No urge to confront him. The silence that once felt like punishment started to feel like protection. I realized how much energy I'd wasted performing reliability, being the guy everyone leaned on but no one invested in. Now, I was investing in myself. Quietly. Ruthlessly. There were setbacks. Bugs that erased hours of work. Late nights where progress felt invisible. Moments where doubt crept back in and whispered, "What if this never goes anywhere?" But even then, the work felt clean. Honest. Mine. One evening, I onboarded a second client. Then a third. Small fees. No fanfare. Just steady confirmation that what I was building solved a real problem in a way the louder, shinier product didn't. I started to understand something important. If my brother's success was built on momentum and perception, mine was being built on foundation. And foundations don't announce themselves, they just hold. I didn't know it yet, but while I was quietly strengthening mine, cracks were already forming in his. I just wasn't looking for them anymore. I didn't notice the cracks at first because I wasn't looking for them anymore. That was the irony. The moment I stopped obsessing over my brother's trajectory was the moment it started bending under its own weight. The updates didn't come directly to me, they filtered in sideways, through pauses in conversations and half-finished sentences at family gatherings. "Things are busy for him right now," my mom said one evening, stirring her tea a little too aggressively. Startups have ups and downs, my dad added, like he was reciting something he'd read online. Busy had replaced thriving. Down had replaced limitless. A cousin mentioned layoffs in passing. An old friend asked me, cautiously, if everything was okay with my brother's company. I didn't ask follow-up questions. I just nodded, non-committal, like someone hearing about weather in a city they no longer lived in. Meanwhile, my days were getting fuller. Not louder, fuller. More users. Fewer fires. I started turning down features that didn't align with the core problem instead of chasing every opportunity. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to someone else's pace. I was setting my own. One night, my brother texted me out of nowhere. "You around?" Just those 2 words. No emojis. No enthusiasm. I stared at the message longer than I should have. Months ago, I would have replied instantly, ready to help, to fix, to step in. Now, I felt detached. Not cruel. Just distant. I didn't respond. Over the next few weeks, the silence spoke louder than any confrontation ever could. His company stopped showing up in articles. His social posts slowed, then stopped entirely. My parents stopped bringing him up altogether, like saying his name might crack something fragile. And still, I felt nothing like victory. Just a quiet confirmation that momentum without foundation eventually collapses under its own weight. Late one night, as I closed my laptop after a long but productive work session, my phone buzzed again. Another message from him. This one longer. This one heavier. I didn't open it right away. Because some doors, once closed, don't need to be slammed to stay shut. I opened the message the next morning, not because I felt ready, but because ignoring it forever felt like giving it power. It wasn't dramatic. No apologies. No ownership. Just pressure wrapped in familiarity. Things are rough. Investors pulled out. We're restructuring. I could really use your help right now. I read it twice. Then a third time. My chest tightened, not with anger, but with a strange, hollow sadness. This was the moment I used to imagine late at night when everything still hurt. The moment where he'd finally see me. Need me. Acknowledge that I wasn't just the background character in his story. But the message didn't say I'm sorry. It didn't say I was wrong. It didn't even say thank you. It was just, expectation. Like the years hadn't passed. Like the money, the erasure, the gaslighting had all been a misunderstanding we could skip over now that he was uncomfortable. I didn't reply. A week later, the collapse went public. The same feeds that once praised his vision now dissected his mistakes. Headlines softened the language, but the truth leaked through: mismanagement, rushed scaling, promises that outpaced reality. Employees were let go. Partners distanced themselves. The shine wore off fast once the momentum died. My parents called me that night. Not to ask how I was doing. To update me. "He's having a really hard time," my mom said quietly. "He could use his brother," my dad added. I listened. I nodded, even though they couldn't see me. I felt the old reflex twitch, the urge to step in, to absorb the chaos, to be useful again. But something had changed. For the first time, helping him would have meant betraying myself. I ended the call politely and sat alone in my apartment, lights off, city noise humming through the window. I thought about how easy it would be to respond. To offer advice. To send money. To replay the role everyone expected of me. Instead, I did nothing. And in that stillness, I realized the fall wasn't his company failing. It was the moment he discovered I was no longer there to catch him. The question was whether I was ready to live with that truth. I didn't hear from my brother again after that. No follow-up message. No apology. Just silence, the kind that used to scare me. This time, it didn't. This time, it felt earned. Life didn't magically turn perfect. My business didn't explode overnight or land flashy headlines. What it did was stabilize. Slowly. Quietly. Month by month, users stayed. Referrals came in without begging. Problems surfaced, got solved, and stayed solved. For the first time in my life, my effort wasn't leaking into someone else's future. My relationship with my parents changed too. Not dramatically, no big confrontations or tearful breakthroughs. Just distance. Boundaries. When they talked about my brother, I listened without stepping in. When they hinted that I should reach out, I changed the subject. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped defending my choices. And something surprising happened. Without constantly rescuing someone else, I had energy. Space. I slept better. I thought clearer. I stopped measuring my worth by how much I could absorb without breaking. I started seeing myself not as the reliable one, but as the capable one. There were moments, quiet ones, where I felt a flicker of guilt. Wondered if I'd been too cold. Too distant. But then I'd remember the months of doubt, the way my reality had been dismissed, the ease with which my role had been reduced to a bank account and a background character. Distance wasn't revenge. It was protection. The last update I heard about my brother came indirectly. He'd moved back home. Was figuring things out. The same phrase he'd used for years, only now, no one was financing it. As for me, I kept building. Kept choosing myself. Kept my silence. I used to think loyalty meant sacrifice. That love was proven by how much you were willing to give up. Now I know better. Real loyalty, especially to yourself, means knowing when to stop paying the price for someone else's lessons. I didn't watch him lose everything with satisfaction. I watched him lose access to me. And for the first time, that was enough.